Hey Bookaholics, so welcome back to another video. Today I am bringing you a dark fantasy recommendations video. Throughout October, everyone is always releasing their atmospheric reads or their scary reads or horror books or whatever it is to do with the Halloween season that brings them joy at this time of year. And it got me thinking, what do fantasy fans get? Like what is our seasonal reading? So I decided at the end of the day, there is a lot of stabby, a lot of grim, a lot of dark stuff that we'd associate with Halloween. If you look at like the horrors, you get a lot of very dark horrors. So I have decided that I'm going to recommend some really dark fantasy. And I don't just mean like grim, it's quite miserable, the world sucks, because there's a lot of those in fantasy. I mean the ones that have some of the most traumatic scenes I have read in fantasy as your October recommendations. My current read is one of the ones that put me on the path to making this video because it is so dark, and I decided to read it for October for that particular reason, that it's dark. So I finished the first book, and I can at least recommend the first book. I don't know about the rest of the series so far, but the first book. I'm going to recommend Godblind by Anna Stephens. This book is about a war between gods, essentially. We have two kingdoms, one that worship the red gods and one that worship the dancer and fox gods. And one is more like a nature-based deity and one is blood magic. And we have these two kingdoms that have been ignoring each other for the longest time, aside from the border countries. And the king of one of the countries has fallen ill, and therefore the opposing kingdom is beginning to amass its army to invade. And we are following a huge cast of characters as they have different roles in this war. It's a fantastically interesting story. It's very compelling. The chapters are really short, but I still feel like I get a decent grasp of the characters, even though I only spend a few pages at a time with them. Like the chapters are between, I don't know, 3 and 6, maybe there's a chapter that's 10 pages, but they're very, very short chapters, so it's very compulsively readable. It's one of those where you can just say one more chapter and end up reading the whole book because one more chapter is so short. So yeah, I would highly recommend. This one is dark in a plethora of ways. We have obviously just the atrocities of war, we have blood sacrifices. This book also opens up with an attempted rape scene. We do have rape scenes in here as well, so content warnings for that. And we also have a huge amount of gore. We have some very disturbing scenes when it comes to violence, and then we also have someone who through their insanity begins to eat themselves. So it's very dark, but it is a very compelling and compulsively readable if you can handle all of the grim elements that are in here. Would highly recommend for this time of year. Another dark fantasy that I would recommend is the Empires of Dust series by Anna Smith Spark. This series is a multiple perspective series in which we are following the decline of an empire. There is an emperor on the throne who is not doing his duty and war is brewing. We follow it from multiple perspectives, from the perspective of a nobleman, a mercenary, a priestess, and it is following the fall of an empire, the fall of the society as they know it. This one is a trilogy that I have a review for, and this one is just, it has a lot of darkness that is created in an innate way of the world. This is just how people live. The opening scene in this is someone who is in the midst of a battle, not some lord on a horse. It is literally someone who is surrounded by dying comrades and foes alike. It's very descriptive, and that is the thing. You get a lot of war in here, and it is very descriptive. It's not one of those where you just kind of get told as an overview from a lord's perspective or from cavalry perspective. It's not some kind of hero worshipping, glory seeking, excellent knight who's going to charge their way through an entire horde of enemies. It's just someone who is shoulder to shoulder with his comrades who are dying, who are in pain, who have been at it for hours, and it's depicted in a very raw and visceral way. So it's not necessarily as dark dark in the sense of it has these like super hugely triggering scenes, but it's just very dark in the way it approaches its descriptions of things that would normally be paraded as something noble or something that would make a hero a hero. In this, it's just someone that makes a dead person dead. Potentially one of the most gruesome and disturbing scenes I have ever read in fantasy, one that haunts me still. So huge content warnings for this whole series. Please check out the very extensive list of content warnings, is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. This one is a more popular one. This is one that you will have heard of, but this one is a fantasy reimagining of the Sino-Japanese Wars. And if you are a history nerd, and you will know about the rape of Nanjing, this is depicted in this story. So we have some absolute atrocities of war, and what makes it more traumatic is knowing that it is based on our reality. So we have some very, very, very traumatic scenes throughout the series. We have depictions of war, we have depictions of rape, we have depictions of mutilation, child death. You name it, it's probably in it. So if you are triggered by more violent depictions, then please stay away from this series. It is incredibly dark. The fact that I have seen this put on a YA shelf is absolutely disgusting, because I think there are a lot of adults that couldn't read this, let alone children. So please bear that in mind. I know the protagonist is young. I know that it's said that it has the school setting at the start. Do not let that deceive you into thinking that this is not as dark as people say it is. It's incredibly dark. Like I said, the ending of this book, and then where it's discussed later on at the beginning of the second book, is the most traumatic scene I have read in fantasy. R.F. Kuang does not pull her punches. So many discussions around war crimes in this series. There are darker topics that are more political based as well. You have things like colonialism and oppression, etc. There are actual on-page scenes and descriptions that are very disturbing. This series follows a young woman named Rin who comes from a poor area where she is expected to just marry off, and that is her duty. But that's not what she wants. So she enters into this very prestigious exam that if you pass it, you will be granted access into one of the universities. She does manage to pass it and therefore gets accepted into the military academy, which is the only one that has free tuition. While there, it is her facing the realities of war, facing the realities of her position, that just because she has gotten into this school, it has not garnered her any more rights or respect. She's still a woman and she's still dark skinned, she's still poor, and it is about what is happening in this kingdom being confronted with actual war when you have been training for it, and the differences between training in a military academy and actually confronting the enemy on the battlefield. The next recommendation that I have is the 5th season and the Broken Earth series as a whole by N.K. Jemisin. This is a series that depicts racism very thoroughly. It has so many traumatic scenes in here. We have infant death, we have body horror, we have gore, we have sexual servitude mentioned, we have a lot of things going on in here. Beating people into submission and oppression, forced institutionalization, essentially the use of someone's body as a vessel against their will, essentially. There are so many things that go on in this one, and then we also just have, like I said, some more like gruesome bodily elements going on as well. So it's a very dark series with very, very dark themes. This is about Essen, who is a mother in a world where there is every few hundred years a 5th season, which is just total destruction. It completely obliterates civilization. And there are people called Origins who are capable of manipulating these elements. However, instead of revered as those who could help, they are instead forced into servitude. And at the beginning of this story, Essen's son, she comes home and her son has been murdered by her husband, and he has left with her daughter. So now she has to flee across the continent to go and rescue her daughter. It is a very, very harrowing series. Again, check all of the content warnings because there are a lot. The next one that I have is dark, but the depictions, it's mostly on one portion of the book. It's not quite the same as the others where there's like multiple very harrowing scenes throughout the whole series. But that would be the Parable of the Talents, or the Parable series, the Earthseed series by Octavia E. Butler. This one is a classic dystopian Afrofuturistic series in which civilization has collapsed, and we are now in kind of micro civilizations, and we are following Asha, who has the power to feel other people's pain, and we're following her story as she learns how to survive in this world, and she eventually creates a new belief system. And there is a section in here in which we have this kind of group of people that are all adhering to her belief system be taken over by people who disagree with this belief system, and it is not pretty. So that is kind of the section that is very much a difficult bit to read. So I would recommend proceeding with caution. This is probably the one that has the least amount of just general gore and horrors and atrocities, but it does have this section specifically that is very, very difficult to read. So once again, please check content warnings. The last series that I have to talk about is the Barclan series by C.M. Curley. This one is an adult epic fantasy series that is self-published and is probably my favorite self-published series to date. I absolutely adore this series, and in it we are following two brothers who are in a world where people with magical abilities get recruited into this kind of sect of people, and when the recruiters come by this village, absolutely terrifying and tragic things happen, so that these two brothers then end up needing to flee and hide in the nearest city. However, they've been living there for a while and they have begun to garner suspicion from their neighbors about their abilities, so they decide that they need to flee to the capital to better mask what is their skills, because the capital is so overrun with people that they would go unnoticed. However, unbeknownst to them, their arrival in the capital was prophesized and foreseen, and they are to be embroiled in the goings on politically and sociologically of this world much more than they anticipated. C.M. Curley went to the Robin Hobb school of how to completely mess up your protagonists. She puts these poor boys through so much, like just so much. But there are a couple of torture scenes in here that are very body horror. There is a rape scene, there are battles and fights, there is loss of life, of limb, of will to live. There is so much going on here in this series. It does get very dark. There is a kind of magic that involves cannibalism. I think that if you like dark fantasy, but you also like your fantasy to be incredibly political, then you can't go wrong with this series. It's absolutely incredible. It's so underhyped. I want more people to read it because I need more people to talk to about this series, and it ticks so many boxes of what a lot of fantasy fans are looking for if you're looking for something dark, because it still has epic fantasy vibes to it. It has a fantastic mythology behind it, but it does get incredibly dark on page, not just mentioned. Like, you see some very horrific scenes. So do bear that in mind. The author, I'm sure, will be more than happy to provide you with a full list of content warnings. She's available on Instagram and on Twitter, so go ask for a full list if you need to. But it is dark, but fabulous. But dark. So there you have it, folks. Those are all of the very, very, very dark fantasies that I have to recommend for you today. Let me know which are some of the darkest fantasies that you have read and why. And please also, if you are going to list why, if there's any spoilers, then, leave spoiler warnings in the comments so that it doesn't spoil it for other people. And yeah, that is all from me for today. So thank you ever so much for watching, and I will hopefully catch you in another one soon. Bye!